This cathartic and hyper-competitive game of StarCraft really came to mind whenever I thought about my Texas Rangers winning a World Series finally and showing how resolute and resilient that they were. This is a game between IdrA Fields, the American macro machine, my personal favorite player ever, and Boxer, one of the most famous and talented Korean pro gamers ever. And if you look at the career arc of Boxer, he was pretty much the most famous Korean Terran in Brood War until Flash came on the scene. If you look at the beginning of Brood War, you had Boxer was the biggest name that everybody knew and the most famous pro gamer for years and years. Even though guys like ILOVUV and Nada were more talented than Boxer macro-wise and did more for the Terran race, Boxer was an incredibly talented, stalwart micro-based player that a lot of guys really look to as like one of the first great fundamental minds of RTS. Make no mistake, Boxer is a cheesy, micro-based player. When I say cheesy, that's not to say that like his mechanics are bad or that he's going to float money or that he can't keep up. That's just to say that I've watched old Boxer games from '04, Boxer games from the early 2010 GSL era. This is a guy who likes to do two base all-ins. This is a guy who likes to go for aggressive timings that target a base of yours and then expand. This is not the sort of guy like Innovation who is blindly going to take fast 3cc and go into 6 Hellions and try to get as many barracks up as possible and go into a fast mid game, and then that allows him to transition into the mid-late game. No. This is a guy who, if you're Zerg, you're really worried about all the way from the early game up until the mid game, and we can see that Boxer intelligently walled in and prevented IdrA from being able to do any scouting. This is MLG Orlando 2011, and this was one of the most interesting lands in StarCraft 2 history because this wasn't quite to the Kespa era where guys like Jaedong and Flash had come over, but this was sort of like the first wave of Koreans to come over because the first few MLGs that occurred, like in 2010, didn't have very many Korean players at all. And this was a land that had guys like Boxer and other top-end Korean players who competed in the GSL come over. And guys like IdrA and Huck made exceptionally deep runs in this tournament. And this was one of the last rounds of this tournament. This was like round of 8, basically. The way that the winner's bracket and loser bracket works at MLG is weird, but this is basically like a round of 4 game at MLG Orlando. And what's interesting about this is IdrA looked really strong throughout this entire tournament, and this was an era where Terran was really good and could put pressure on Zerg, and he sees Reactored Hellion almost certainly, although in this era, weirdly, there was sort of a little shift in the meta from the very beginning of the beta as we see, holy crap, he's trying to sneak a gold on the top left. Huge find there from IdrA. If he can actually kill that a lot, and he does, he cancels it, so that's massive. Boxer trying to be super sneaky and sneak that gold base. Very deceptive play from him. This is what I mean, like Boxer would do crazy off-the-wall stuff. And if we think about the context of this series, IdrA was looking infallible in this tournament and very strong, and went out to an early series lead, but Boxer brought it to 3-3. So whoever wins this wins it all and will advance on to play MC. So not only is Boxer very aggressive, but the maps were much smaller and better for aggressive rushy Terran. Notice how short the Queen range is. The Queen has 3 range. You can't just mass a bunch of Queens and be safe versus everything. Notice how huge the choke is. The Hellion is great on this map. You can literally attack from 2 different run-ups and neither one of them are ramps. And of course the rush distance is way shorter and the third base is harder to defend. It's just way harder to be Zerg. Every little second here is tenuous as IdrA's Ling speed is only about 15% of the way done. And we saw 2 factory Hellion not really come into prominence until this specific tournament. It might seem weird, but it took Terrans a long time to realize that Reactored Hellion was even good. And bizarrely, we would see Terrans go for like non-reactored Hellion, make 4 Hellions out of a non-add-on factory, and then do like a bio push with some Hellion support. You have to understand that from the beginning of the beta in March of 2010 up until about mid-2011, people were doing a lot of weird rush-centric stuff. They were still trying to figure stuff out on a basic rudimentary level. Double gas coming down here for IdrA, as well as the Baneling Nest and Lair. Scouting a hidden base from your opponent is absolutely massive, especially when they cancel it. Because if IdrA had just seen him like floating a base over there and stopped it, it would have been nice. But the fact that Boxer like very greedily and sneakily tried to just build it up there, the fact that it was cancelled meant that his normal natural was delayed, and IdrA sees that the orbital is just now finished, which means that he's way, way ahead, because usually the orbital would be finishing whenever you have about the same amount of workers as the Terran. But as it stands, Boxer pressuring forward a plethora of Hellions. IdrA trying to fall back to his spines, building 2 more spines. Tons of pressure here as Boxer is really bringing the hammer down on the Kraken. IdrA running forward with Lings to try to sponge a little bit. But when you have this many Hellions, your Queens can really take damage to the point where they can die, like we see there as a Queen being incinerated. And the Spine Crawler not really doing much as IdrA running Lings up to try to protect the Spine, and he doesn't really have the ability to kill or gap close on the Hellions. He really needs to rely on the Spines to kill the Hellions, but when there's so many and your Queen only has 3 ground range, it's so difficult. IdrA juggling the Spines, but at this point he has 4 Spines up, with several up by the ramp side, and with the Spine down southbound, it's going to be very hard for Boxer to break in. And with Banelings connecting on some spines, about 6 Hellions out here compared to 4 spines, and I think it's going to be very hard for Boxer to get damage done as he's continuing to rally Hellions. We can see 4 racks in the production tab, and this was a classic Boxer move where he delays his bases, he delays tech, and he really goes for a super aggressive in-your-face option that has the potential to break you. If we looked at the worker tab there, Boxer didn't have many workers as he's probably thinking about running up the ramp, as when you're going for a Hellion-based style and you fall behind, you can potentially run up the ramp and deal a killing blow. IdrA thankfully has a couple Banes, but he could take severe damage as Bane speed is not even close to done, and he's doing the dreaded Baneling pull. The Kraken in severe danger here. He could take game-ending damage. Boxer making some more Hellions, firing down upon the Queens, microing his Hellions. And Boxer in a weird spot where he knows IdrA can just completely block his ramp. IdrA has spines out, he could have repositioned, and Boxer patrolling the main, getting as much damage done as possible, killing the Lings, killing the Queens, and delaying mining time for the Kraken. Mutas are out here for IdrA, and that's a tough spot to get hit with the Hellion timing whenever your Mutas are trying to hatch, because that's a huge power trough for Zerg, and whenever the Mutas hatch, it's a power spike. Bane speed is about finished here, and whenever you go for exceptionally aggressive, committed, tech-based aggression, especially in Wings of Liberty, it's going to set your other stuff behind. Notice Stim, Combat Shield, and +1 just now being started, 12 minutes in the game for Boxer. Turrets are up here as he lands a factory. But this is one of those situations where you're able to prevent yourself from dying by spamming turrets, but you're actually so far behind. You're far behind tech-wise, you're far behind in your ability to make units as far as the very basic unit-producing facilities goes, because essentially what Boxer did was he rushed up to factory there. He forewent the second add-on for the factory. He didn't get Blue Flame. He wasn't researching anything in his barracks as IdrA starting to pick stuff off, picking off this tech lab, which is absolutely monumental because that limits the tank and Thor count, as it looks like Boxer, as he often would try to do, is going to go for a hefty mix. He's not really going to go for the polarizing styles that we're used to seeing today, where it's only mech units or only bio with a few mines thrown in. Boxer would frequently go for multiple factory mech plays in addition to bio, and he would favor bulky marauder styles in addition to his hefty tank and Thor armies. It's very interesting to see that even back in this time, you can see the presence, the creativity, and brilliance of Boxer shine through as IdrA takes another base. IdrA realizes exactly what I pointed out, which is that, okay, he's spamming turrets, his tech's way behind, he gave up a lot to do that Hellion pressure, and whenever you barely hold something in StarCraft and it feels like, holy crap, like how do they have so much stuff this early? They have to give something up to have that much stuff. Boxer gave up barracks. He didn't have a starport going Banshee. He didn't have a third base. He didn't have stem researching. He gave up everything. He even cut workers to squeeze out those extra Hellions. He almost killed IdrA, but he failed. IdrA picks off a turret, and much like a Brood War game, it starts to snowball out of control for you when you're Terran and you lose your turrets over your mineral line. However, in StarCraft 2, as soon as the first Thor comes out, you're very safe against the lion's share of Muta harass as long as you continue to play safe and use other supporting units. Remember, the Widow Mine didn't exist in this time, but the Muta also didn't regenerate passively like it does. The Muta was way worse, and if you took damage on your Mutas, it was incredibly devastating, and the Thor, because it would deal splash damage and bonus damage to light units, was the end-all be-all real answer to the Muta in TVZ. And rushing up to the Thor would be the shift over and power spike between the Zerg and the Terran, because the game would often look like this one did, where the Zerg would get Muta out, do a little harass, get map control, take a third, maybe take a fourth, and then once the first Thor comes out, suddenly the Zerg has to be very careful because the Thor does so much splash damage, where if you try to run in and harass over a Thor, or God forbid two, you're going to take too much hull damage on your Mutas. And remember, it's not Heart of the Swarm or Legacy. You do not have passive regen on your Mutas, and it's a huge deal. The reason that IdrA early left versus MMA in that famous MLG match that would occur like a year after this was he said, there was a drop in my main I couldn't deal with, and Muta retention is everything. TVZ is he flies in and magic boxes over the Thor, which is when you run over and do hold position so your Mutas don't clump, picks off both the turrets, and this is when things really start to snowball horrifically badly if you're the Terran, because a lot of times you're not going to want to make a plethora of Thors because you're worried about the ground army. You need splash for the Lings and the Banes. IdrA with the thunderous supply lead, maxed out versus 130, and really the fact that Boxer doesn't have a Thor is what's going to make it so difficult for him to defend. Because IdrA can just run in the main and deal damage and then run in at the natural with Ling Bane, and he might come in with everything in the natural. Ling Bane screaming in here for the Kraken as he's going to focus fire the tanks with the Mutas and try to run in with the Banes onto the bio, and he kills most of Boxer's army. But because IdrA's on 4 base, has very good creep spread for the era, is taking a 5th, and one of the bases is a gold, and Boxer's on a mere 2 bases, IdrA's way ahead. He can replenish way faster than Boxer, and even though the Wings of Liberty bases had more minerals than the Legacy bases and it took longer to mine out, IdrA can do this. This is what I'm talking about. Whenever you kill that Thor and kill the 2 turrets and your opponent doesn't have a third, suddenly they're sitting there to themselves saying, okay, what happens when he knifes in the main again with Muta? That happens. You take severe damage. And once you kill that Thor and they're not making another, they're not going full-blown mech, they're worried about the ground army and they're going tanks, you can snowball your lead super hard. In the same way that the back and forth between, okay, I have 8 Mutas out, I'm harassing, okay, the first Thor's out, now I have to retreat. Once you get 20 Mutas with a couple upgrades, one Thor suddenly becomes not as big of a deal. Also, the attack upgrade on the Thor really helps you. IdrA trying to move in some army, flanking into the natural as he crushes the third, screaming in with Mutiling Baneling is the Kraken, and we can see that little counterattack I spoke about as he's running in with the Mutas, trying to avoid the Thor with the Muta and attacking the Thor with the Lings brilliantly. And another thing you want to avoid is trading Mutas straight into Lings, but Mutiling Bane into Marine is the beauty. It is what you want to go for. It is absolutely incredible as far as the Zerg perspective. Man, if you can get your Mutiling Bling on top of Bio, that's really what it's all about, folks. What you don't want to happen is the Terran to be able to parry you back and forth with Thors and Boxer GGs, and because that was a VOD, and not like the old school replay, we can't see it, but whenever IdrA came out of his booth, he gave a thunderous fist pump. And as far as being able to see things like that, look, the fact of the matter is we're lucky to be able to even see this VOD in HD quality. And a lot of times I want to see like a specific version of a recording, and it's just not there or it's impossible to find. A big shout out to SC2. POVs, who is a guy that I've shouted out on my channel multiple times. He goes out of his way to catalog these old games without commentary, so a lot of times I'll have a game in my memory banks or that maybe I see on Team Liquid that I want to cover. It's almost always the former, by the way. And I'll look and wow, it's impossible to find because IPL and MLG and all these other companies didn't do a worth a shit job of cataloging their VODs. But this guy, SC2 POVs, does, so make sure to go sub to him. Link will be in the description. But this was such a big deal because IdrA and Boxer were pretty much the two biggest names in esports at the time. And this was the game that like broke the Twitch viewership record and held the Twitch viewership record for years and years. And it's because it was pretty much everything that people liked about Wings of Liberty at the time. Like two very talented, fun to watch players, like a macro foreigner, a micro based Korean. You had a guy who was going to put the pressure on and really get in the face of the guy who always wanted to macro and was known for being brash and outspoken and not liking people cheesing him. This checked off every little narrative box, and this was at the peak of the game when StarCraft 2 was still popular and you could still get people on to play custom games, and the people who wouldn't play custom games with you would play the arcade. And this reminded me of the Texas Rangers, my baseball team, winning the World Series in many ways because you had this tremendous uphill battle as far as the career of IdrA Fields goes in the Brood War era, where it was nearly impossible to win anything if you were a foreigner in Brood War. And then the StarCraft 2 era came along and IdrA was the best. Well, he was unfortunately unable to win a GSL, as we covered on the Gregathon series, which is on a playlist that I encourage you to check out. So after IdrA came back to America, there was sort of this question of can he compete with the top Koreans? So then like Boxer and MC and these guys that were making deep runs of GSL came over to these MLGs starting in mid-2011. And whenever IdrA won this game versus Boxer, not only was it highly anticipated and highly viewed, and he came out and gave a huge fist pump, but it really showed, okay, he can compete with the top Koreans. And if you followed the Gregathon series, like, yeah, we saw that. We saw him take a game off MVP on freaking Steps of War, the most Terran-favored map in StarCraft history. Like, we saw him make deep GSL runs, like round of 8, and then running into Jinro on close positions in Jungle Basin. So if you understand the history of the game and sort of the plight of IdrA and the plight of Zerg from the beta of Wings of Liberty until 2012, this match really means more because we saw Boxer going for like a super aggressive, abusive Hellion build and IdrA just barely being able to hold and then transitioning into a macro lead. And this is where, if you're the Terran player, the shit really hits the fan. Because if you have the one Thor there and it dies, and I think you see on the unit tab he had 2, so presumably he had 1 at the natural. But if the Zerg is going to make Muta and they can just boss in and walk into your main and you have enough Muta with upgrade to kill your Thor, then you're in a position where it's like, well, I don't have an answer for the Thor. Because there's no Liberator, there's no Widow Mine, Speed Boost Medevac doesn't exist. The Muta plays much more like the Brood War Muta. It's a much more interesting tactical unit. And I think the Muta is one of the best units in StarCraft 2 history, truth be told. But just look at the supplies here, like, and think about the economy. IdrA is literally on 83 freaking workers, and Boxer's third base is like just finishing. And one of IdrA's bases is a gold base, and he's taking a 5th. So you can see IdrA doing exactly what he should have done, which is like as his 2-2 upgrades are going, he is continuing to make stuff, and he's remaxing. He's not getting in a position where, okay, I've made 50 lings, I'm going to immediately run the lings in and try to kill him. No. He's making like 100 lings, making 30 banelings, and as that's happening, he's running into the main, distracting Boxer, dealing worker damage, killing buildings. And then what happens whenever you harass your opponent in the main constantly is they have to have units in the main. They have to commit units over there, which is a huge deal because that means that whenever you attack the third is going to be weaker. This was a masterclass from IdrA. He didn't play too stubborn. He didn't play too robotically. He didn't play too greedy. He's dialing up counterattacks. One of my favorite parts of this game was about 5 minutes ago when he flew in with the mutas and saw that he was making turrets desperately but was clearly behind, and he said, okay, I'm way ahead. He took a third and a fourth. He rapidly double expanded and flooded drones. And he had perfect 2-base saturation and had drones screaming out to the third base before it was even done, and then he started to drone the gold base too. So this is why they called him the macro machine, and this was one of the most famous matches in IdrA's career and in StarCraft history. Make sure that you guys check out the playlist on my channel of the best StarCraft games ever, and leave a comment on this video saying easy and leave me a like. Hit the bell notification for the sub. Easy.